Okay, this video will cover duration gap and interest rate gap through two examples that I'm going to provide here. The first one, we're going to do duration gap. And remember, we need to clarify and make sure that you understand the difference between duration gap and plain old gap, as your textbook author in Chapter 9 explains. Duration gap measures how sensitive are your assets to changes in interest rates. And those assets can be, typically are non-variable, in other words, fixed rate bonds and liabilities. So even though you have fixed rate bonds and liabilities, when interest rates change, you know that the value of those, the market value of those assets and liabilities change. And that's what duration is trying to measure. Now, the concept of duration gap is telling you that there's a difference between the sensitivity of your assets versus the sensitivity of your liabilities. It's not just a difference in just sensitivity, it's differences in the balances. So you have 200 here in assets, you have 180 in liabilities here, so you have a difference just in the market values, but you also, as you can see, have differences in the actual duration numbers here. Now, before we get to the first question of this problem, take a look at what duration is here. Now, duration is a calculation where that number, duration, the higher the number, the more sensitive the asset is to changes in interest rates. So if you look here, you got loan A, B, C, mortgage X and Y. What is the most sensitive to changes in interest rates? It's mortgage Y right here, because it has a duration of 4. And that means, you know, the easiest way to interpret that to mean is, look, if interest rates go up 100 basis points, say from 3 to 4%, up 100 basis points, what will happen to the market value of mortgage Y? It will go down 4%. It'll go down by the duration here. So think of this as a percentage. And that percent is what's going to happen when interest rates change by 100 basis points. Now, if interest rates go down 100 basis points, they go from 7 to 6%, then the mortgages are going to go up by 4%. It'll go up 4%. So this $40 will go up 4%. And so that's how you interpret it. The interpretation works exactly the same over here in the liabilities side as the change in the value of those liabilities. So now let's look at the question A a little more carefully. It says compute the duration of the asset portfolio. In other words, the loans and the mortgages, the whole portfolio. And what are the units? Well, here I have the calculation in bold. Highlight it here for you. There is the calculation. And the units, the answer to that part is, look, it's in years. Duration is a weighting of time. Okay, so now, what did we do here? We're looking at the weight that A has relative to the total. It's hard click covering this. But we got 20 for A over 200. That's 10% of the portfolio, has a 2% duration. It looks like 20% of the portfolio has a 3% duration, and so on. You add that up, the average of these two numbers based on the market weights is 2.4 years. Okay, now what are we going to do with that, and what does it mean? Well, before we actually address the 50-point change, what I can tell you is that if interest rates change by 100 basis points, the total value of your assets and liabilities are going to change by 2.4% for a 100 basis point change in interest rates. But that's not what the question's asking. The question is, what happens if there's a 50 basis point decrease? Well, 50 basis points is half of a 100 basis point change. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a percentage change in market value of your assets will end up being 1.2%. Notice the double negative sign, the negative sign in front of the duration. This guy right here, that guy right there captures the inverse relationship between interest rates and changes in market values. And then we have a negative change in interest rates right here. That's where that negative sign comes in. So the negative and the negative turns it into a positive. So interest rates decline. Our assets, these guys right here, are going to go up 1.2%. Now we do the same calculation on the duration side here. So again, it's going to be, the units are going to be in years, and all we're doing is we're taking a weighted average here using these numbers of these durations. Now look at checking carefully. Checking account pays no interest, so it has a 0 duration, because it's not sensitive to interest rates changes. You know, you deposit $100 in a bank, the bank keeps that $100, and that value of that checking account doesn't change with interest rates according to the calculation. So your market value of liabilities, the percentage change in the market value of your liabilities, turns out to be about half, because in this case, remember, a 50 basis point decrease, that's half of a 100 basis point decrease. So the calculation pops up right here, and our liabilities will increase, which kind of hurts a bit, by a half a percentage point. But the fact that we have more sensitive assets and we have more assets, the net effect will be a positive. You can see that already, that we'll have a positive effect of a change in, when I mean a change, a drop of 50 basis points in interest rates. We'll see in a second. And that, so part C says, what will be the change in net worth in dollars if rates decline by 50 basis points? So here we have the percentage change in dollars, or I'm sorry, the dollar change in net worth. And that's simply, intuitively, it's the change in your assets minus the change in your liabilities. And so your assets are going to go up 1.2%. So they go from 200 to 202.4. The liabilities are going to go up by a little less than 0.5%, which means they go from 180 to 180.855. Your net worth changes from 20, where it started with, right up here, equity was 20. Now it's 21.545. Net worth increased a bit. That's good. Your capital for the bank has gone up. Regulators will like it. Your bank is a bit more safer from that change in interest rates. Okay. Now, part E asks a question. Oops, sorry, D. Let's go to D. Let's not skip D. It says, using your answers above, compute the duration gap of the bank. So duration gap at a bank is what it's going to reflect is, let's rewind up here. Duration gap is going to reflect the differences in the average durations here, and it's also going to reflect the differences in the market values, and that will be the duration gap. So remember, when you have a duration gap, what it ultimately means is that when interest rates change, you're going to have a change in equity. If you had a 0 duration gap, that means your bank was perfectly hedged against interest rate risk. So if interest rates change, your asset changes in dollars will offset perfectly your liability change in dollars, and there'll be no change in your equity or net worth. But we do have a gap, and the gap is measured right here. It's the 2.4 for the assets minus the weight of your liabilities relative to your assets times the duration of your liabilities, and that comes out to be 1.545 years. Okay, so that's your duration gap. Now, use that duration gap calculation and basically use it to confirm what we calculated above. And so look, we're assuming a 50 basis point decrease in rates again. And so the change in net worth relative to assets, this calculation is in percent, will be the duration gap we just calculated times the 50 basis points, and that means we will have an increase of 0.7725 change in net worth. Okay, it's about a 0.75% change in net worth. That's what it's telling you. Well, how do we know that? Well, we can check it. Our equity went from 20 to 21.545 over 200. You know, it's all relative to assets. And so we had a little more than 0.75% point change increase in net worth due to that decrease in interest rates. Okay. So that was duration gap. Now let's look at a problem of plain old interest rate gap. So here we have another balance sheet of a bank, assets and liabilities as before. Let's look at it closely. Now look, before we even get to the question, take a look at this data. The duration of these loans are 0. What does that tell you? It tells you that there's no sensitivity to changes in interest rates. Now why would that be? The reason would be these loans, A, B, and C, are variable rate loans. So when interest rates go up in the economy, the loan has a higher interest rate. It goes up with the economy's interest rates. And so there's no change in the value of the loans. So the durations here are 0. And here, with a checking account of 0, it's like before, we had we had durations of 0, a duration of 0 because there's no interest rate associated with a checking account. The retail CDs here have a 0 duration because they're so short term that changes in interest rates are reflected completely in the change of the retail CD interest rates because these things roll over so frequently. So now the question is, if rates go up, okay, so if rates increase by 100 basis points, what will happen to our net interest income? So remember, we're focusing on net interest income when we're dealing with just gap or interest rate gap, not using the word duration, just plain gap. Now, according to the calculation, we have $130 million in variable rate loans right here. They're variable rate loans, 130 million of them, and interest rates are going to go up 100 basis points. That means we're going to get $1.3 more million in interest income. Okay, $1.3 million. That's good. But, we're going to get hit with paying higher interest expense because of that increase in interest rates. So how much is that going to be? Well, we only have $50 in retail CDs that are sensitive to interest rates. Remember, checking accounts don't pay any interest rates, so when interest rates change, no impact on your checking account. So we take that 50 from the retail CDs, we multiply it by 100 basis points, and our interest expense will increase by $500,000. The net effect will be net interest income will go up $0.8 million. So I hope that improves your understanding of duration gap and interest rate gap.